July 25, 2016. Southern New Zealand. Two people who loved each other walked into the mountains. Only one came back. This is not a story about bad luck. It is not a story about freak weather or impossible odds. It is a story about two young people, curious, hopeful, a little reckless, who made a series of decisions that the mountains did not forgive, and about one woman who survived 27 days alone, in the kind of cold that makes survival feel like a personal insult. Her name was Pavlína. She was 33 years old. His name was Andrej PD. He was 27, and before the mountains they had a life. They were Czech, young, the kind of restless that doesn't fit neatly into a career path or a 5-year plan. They had left home months earlier, working the apple orchards of Motueka and Riwaka, repetitive, physical work that paid just enough to keep them moving. What they were really buying was time. Time to see places they had never known. Time to delay whatever came next. Pavlína had an easy laugh and quick hands. She imagined kitchens, mountain lodges, something warm and busy for the winter season. Andrej was a snowboard instructor by trade, someone who understood mountains, or thought he did, which is a different thing entirely. Queenstown drew them south, with its promise of winter work and alpine grandeur. The work never materialized. Days shortened. Money tightened. The gap between plans and reality widened, in the way it does when you're young and far from home and the world isn't cooperating. What remained, constant and visible, were the mountains. So they did what restless people do when confronted with blank space and too much time. They went walking. The Routeburn Track is one of New Zealand's great walks, a phrase that in the right light sounds less like a trail description and more like a dare. In summer it carries thousands of walkers safely through some of the most spectacular alpine terrain on Earth. Maintained huts spaced at manageable intervals, clear markers, predictable stages. In winter, it becomes a different thing entirely. Snow buries the markers. Distances stretch because movement slows to a fraction of what the maps suggest. The weather closes in fast and stays. The Department of Conservation, in its understated way, describes the winter track as the ultimate alpine adventure. For anyone who knows mountains, the subtext is clear: come prepared, or don't come at all. Pavlína and Andrej stopped at the Dofu office in Queenstown before they left, a ranger, grizzled, wary. The kind of person who has seen this before, told them to reconsider. The snow was old but treacherous. The forecast was grim. The conditions were not suitable for walkers without alpine experience and proper equipment. They listened. They nodded. Then they continued with their plan. They had no crampons, no ice axe, no tent, no locator beacon, the small device that, when activated, sends a precise GPS signal to rescue services and costs less than a decent pair of boots. They told no one their exact route. They would rely on the huts. They would be fine. They were not fine. On the morning of July 26th, they set out from the trailhead, having spent the previous night in their campervan at the car park. The first day went well enough. 4 hours to Routeburn Flats hut, where they slept alone in a Spartan shelter that felt, in the moment, like proof the plan was working. The next morning they pushed on, toward Harshest Saddle. The snow began gently, then it thickened. What should have been an hour's walk to the saddle stretched into 5. The trail vanished beneath drifts that swallowed their boots and erased the world behind them. By the time they reached the saddle, exhausted and half-blind, a sign indicated 3 hours onward, to Lake Mackenzie Hut. 3 hours. In clear conditions, that was accurate. In these conditions, it was fiction. They moved forward anyway. The storm deepened as they descended. Visibility collapsed. By 5 in the afternoon, darkness had swept in, and the wind was howling through the ridgelines, with the kind of force that makes thinking difficult. Their headlamps cut a narrow tunnel into the dark, just enough to see where to place a foot, not enough to understand where that step would lead. The track markers disappeared. The ground became unfamiliar. They circled, exhausted and disoriented. They huddled against a sheer rock face, the only shelter available, a thin flap of fabric against a mountain that didn't know they existed. Pavlína sat awake through the night, afraid that if she closed her eyes, The snow would bury them both before morning. Dawn brought a clearing sky. From their makeshift refuge, they could finally see Lake Mackenzie Hut, visible now across the snow-covered ridges that had hidden it from them all night. So close. Close enough to believe the worst was behind them. They set out with new energy. The marked track descended steeply toward the lake, choked with snow. To save time, they chose a shortcut, a decision born of exhaustion and the particular optimism that comes from being almost there. But the terrain betrayed them, drawing them upward onto a spur that led nowhere useful. When they realized the error, clouds had gathered and the wind had returned. They turned back, tried to retrace their steps, but snow had already erased most of their footprints, leaving only scattered impressions that looped back on themselves like a cruel joke. Then Pavlína noticed something wrong with Andrej. Not suddenly, gradual. The kind of wrong that creeps in so slowly, you keep explaining it away. His movements had changed, slower, less coordinated, slightly detached from the urgency of what was happening around them. His words came strangely. Then she saw it. He had taken his jacket off. At those temperatures, that was not a choice. That was a symptom. Hypothermia does not arrive as a collapse. It arrives as confusion, heat misread as warmth, cold misread as mere discomfort, decisions made with total certainty that no longer reflect reality. Andrej insisted his jacket was too heavy. He insisted he was fine. His face was flushed, even as the temperature dropped further. She told him to put the jacket back on. He resisted. They kept moving, because stopping meant exposure, because the hut was somewhere ahead, because there were no other options that felt survivable. Pavlína led. Andrej followed. She looked back once to find him stopped, staring at the ground, his eyes glazed and distant. She called him. His voice came back slurred, nearly unintelligible. He was slipping away, and she knew it, and there was nothing she could do about it, except keep moving and hope the hut arrived before he did. It didn't. Without warning, the snow gave way beneath them. They fell into darkness, not far enough to kill them instantly, far enough to trap them. Pavlína lost her headlamp in the fall, lost a glove, hit the ground disoriented and cold struck. She found Andrej below her, caught between branches and rock, his backpack wedged at an angle that forced his body forward into a position he couldn't correct. He was breathing, barely. Each breath came shallow and restricted, catching in his throat. She tried to pull him free. The pack wouldn't move. The angle wouldn't allow it. The terrain offered no leverage. Every attempt risked sending them both further into whatever lay beneath. So she stayed beside him. I talked to him, kept her hands on him. His breathing changed, from strained to irregular to something quieter. Then it stopped. The mountain did not react. The wind continued above them. Snow continued to fall. Nothing marked the moment, except the sudden presence of silence where effort had been. She was alone. For 2 nights, Pavlína remained beside Andrej's body in the same broken terrain that had taken him. Movement in darkness, without full use of her hands, without clear ground, meant risk without direction, so she waited. Cold settled deeper, into fingers, into feet, into the space between thought and action. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by the need to stay aware, to stay upright, to keep from sliding into the same stillness. On the 3rd day, the weather shifted. The clouds lifted. Light returned. For the first time since the fall, the landscape revealed itself, enough to make a decision. She pressed her lips to his forehead, said goodbye. Then she left. There was no clear route, only memory, and the assumption that the hut was still somewhere below. Each step required full attention. Her legs resisted. Balance was uncertain. The cold had already reduced her coordination, turning simple movement into something that demanded everything she had. She moved slowly. Not by distance, by repetition. Step, pause, correct, continue. At one point, picking her way along the lake's edge, a misstep sent her into the water. Freezing immediate. She dragged herself out, soaked, but now, through a haze of exhaustion, she could see it. The hut. She made it through the door. Inside, food, gas, firewood, contained space. She closed the door behind her, and the environment changed instantly. Not safe, but survivable. For the next 24 days, Pavlína Petova lived alone in Lake Mackenzie hut. Her hands had begun to stiffen. Her feet had lost sensation and then swollen so badly she couldn't force her boots back on for days. She rationed the supplies she found, stretching each meal as far as it would go, measuring portions, with the discipline of someone who understands that the food in this room is all the food that exists. She marked time, not precisely, but enough to maintain sequence, enough to keep the days from dissolving into each other. She exercised outside when she could, walking small circuits with a heavy pack to keep circulation moving in her damaged feet. She used ash from the fire to write a large H for help in the snow. She maintained the fire because fire meant function, and function meant continuation. Aircraft passed overhead. She heard them, left the hut, waved her jacket, her scarf, anything visible. They flew on. She went back inside. Each pass reinforced a single truth. Survival would not come from being found quickly. It would come from lasting long enough. The nights were brutal. The silence was so complete that her own breathing seemed to echo off the walls. She dreamed of warmth, of Andrej's laugh. She woke to the cold and the same four walls and the knowledge that today she would do the same things she had done yesterday. Ration, exercise, maintain the fire, watch the sky, because there was nothing else to do, and stopping meant dying. So she didn't stop. Back in the world, the absence of two people had been noticed. When Pavlína and Andrej failed to return, friends posted concerns online. Vlaka Kennett, the Czech consul in Glenorchy, saw the messages and alerted the Department of Conservation. Police found the campervan at the Routeburn car park, unmoved, exactly where it had been left. That narrowed everything. They were still in the mountains. Search teams began working the route. Aircraft swept across the track and surrounding valleys, scanning for movement, for color, for anything that didn't belong to the landscape. From the air, the terrain offered very little. Snow-flattened detail. A person standing still could disappear completely. On August 26th, 2 days after they had parked the van and walked into the mountains, a helicopter passed near Lake Mackenzie. Pavlína was outside the hut. She had heard it, and this time she moved in a way that could not be mistaken for terrain. Repeated motion, deliberate, sustained, jumping in a fluorescent vest, everything she had, everything left in her. The helicopter adjusted its position, came lower, confirmed she was alive. She was airlifted out immediately. 2 days later, search teams found Andrej's body, approximately 2 kilometers from the hut, on a steep slope, consistent with the fall. The mountain had kept him exactly where it had taken him. Doctors who examined Pavlína described her condition as remarkable, given what she had endured: weight loss, frostbite, physical depletion measured in weeks, but stable, alive, across a threshold that many don't make it back from. The investigation that followed was methodical and unsparing. No locator beacon, no crampons, no ice axe, no tent, no notification of their exact plans. They had been warned directly by a ranger and continued anyway. The Mountain Safety Council's conclusion was cleared. Andrej's death was not inevitable. A handful of different choices, heeding the warning, carrying a beacon, turning back at the first sign of real trouble, could have changed everything. Pavlína said as much herself. She spoke about it afterward without distortion or self-pity. The heavy snow, the low clouds, the disorientation. The moment she understood his condition, the moment she understood she couldn't move him, and the moment she left, she admitted their mistakes directly. No locator beacon, no proper gear, no one knew their exact plan. She had one message for anyone who would listen: respect the mountains, prepare. Never assume that wanting to get through is the same thing as being able to. The Routeburn Track is walkable again now. Markers re-emerge each spring. The terrain becomes defined, ordinary, the kind of path that carries thousands of people safely through the same landscape every summer. Somewhere on that descent, beneath layers of snow that shift and settle with each passing winter, there is a place where the ground gave way. There is no sign of it now, no marker, no memorial. Only the path above it and the distance that once existed between two people walking toward the same shelter. That distance was not far. It never is in stories like this. 2 kilometers, the length of a city block repeated 20 times. In summer, 20 minutes of easy walking. In a winter storm, in the dark, in the grip of hypothermia, with no trail and no bearings, and the mountain removing options, one by one, it was everything. The mountains are not cruel, they are simply indifferent. They do not adjust to account for hope, or youth, or love, or the honest belief that you'll be fine. They apply their conditions equally and without comment. What Pavlína carried out of those mountains, beyond the frostbite, beyond the weight loss, beyond the damage that took months to repair, was something the investigation reports couldn't measure. She had stayed beside him for 2 nights in the dark. She had said goodbye. She had stood up and walked out anyway. That is not a small thing. In the long silence of Lake Mackenzie hut, with 24 days and no company except grief and cold, and the sound of aircraft that didn't see her, she made the same decision every morning that Leon Crane made in Alaska, that the boys of Eta Island made on their cliffs, that Alicia Arnold made on Clipperton, the decision to still be alive tomorrow. It is never a dramatic decision. It doesn't feel like courage when you're making it. It just feels like the only thing left to do, but it is everything. And she made it 24 days in a row.